Am I an idiot for destroying the lives of my ex and his GF since they both emotionally scarred my daughter? I am going to begin with the main players. Me, my ex-wife Pepper, revenge target number 1. Her boyfriend Steve, revenge target number 2. The boyfriend's ex-wife Maria, co-partner in the revenge, my daughter Sarah, and my friend Jason, accomplice in the revenge. With that said, let's get some backstory out of the way. So, Pepper and I had a very up and down marriage. It was one of those that I was madly in love with, but looking back I think she was in it more for the money and convenience. She had one son we will call Drug, because he was and still is a major drug addict. Before we got married, and I also had one son, name is unimportant, that I had full custody of. While married we had Sarah. I touched the marriage out for as long as I could, but eventually, we just couldn't keep it together. We separated, and due to traveling some for work and having custody of my son, I moved back to my hometown a few states away so my parents could help, but kept an apartment in the town that Pepper and Sarah lived in so that I could still spend as much time with my daughter as I could. At this time, I asked my best friend Jason, who is a lawyer and owns his own firm, to do up a child support agreement for us. It is very important to note that we only addressed child support. It had nothing about custody or visitation or anything else in it. So, for about a year this was how it would work. I would spend a month with Sarah while my parents watched my other son, then I would spend a month with my son. Almost exactly a year later I could no longer afford keeping 2 households, and Pepper was wanting to move back to her hometown, which was in a different state but closer to where I lived, so I gave up the apartment and she moved. The new situation continued for a couple more years. Pepper and I remained friendly and even tried to reconcile the relationship a couple of times, but it wouldn't work out. I was still deeply in love with her, but we couldn't come to an agreement on things like where to live and such. I forced myself to try and move on and started dating. She had been dating basically from the day after I moved out. Even though I still loved her, our relationship moved more into good friends than husband and wife. So, she finally meets Steve. I never was told much about Steve other than he was a certified ethical hacker, and that is what he did for employment. Important later. While they were dating, she would send me texts about their dates. She even texted me the day they first had sex together. This hurt deeply, and looking back I think this is what she wanted, but I tried to play the part of good friend and confidant. Steve and Pepper had been dating for 6 months when out of the blue she told me they broke up, and she realized that she is madly in love with me. Since it's the beginning of summer, she packs some suitcases and heads to my state. They were going to spend the summer with me and see if they liked it or not. We had an amazing summer. All the kids are getting along. Drug even loved it here, so she makes it official we are back together, and they are moving in. We went and registered my daughter for school. We even were able to get her on a Pee-wee cheerleading team for the summer. She made several friends and loved being here. There was only one problem. Pepper still had an apartment that had all her furniture and stuff in it. I offered to go up with my truck and help load everything, but she insisted that her and Drug can get it done. So off they go to pack up and then head to their new home. As you can guess, things didn't go as planned. She was home for about 3 days when she informed me that under no circumstance will she move, and that she and Steve are in love and are moving in with each other. To say I was destroyed was an understatement. I couldn't understand why she had done it. The worst part was she left it to me to tell Sarah the bad news. When I told her, the devastated look on her face started turning my feelings of hurt into feelings of anger. Then Sarah broke down and started begging to stay with me and started spilling the beans. She told me things about how her mom would leave with Steve for days and leave Drug in charge. She had to learn how to cook for herself at 8 because Drugs would spend the money on drugs and spend the whole time high. If Drug wasn't left in charge, Pepper would use her multiple convicted felon niece to watch her. She also told me about the first time that she had met Steve. He came to their house, basically said hello, and him and her mom disappeared into the bedroom and started having loud sex. Sarah was outside the door bawling and they just ignored and continued. This is how my 8-year-old learned of sex, and she is still in counseling trying to recover 7 years later. At this point my anger has turned to rage. I immediately notified Pepper that there was no way Sarah was coming back and I would fight her to the death to keep her out of that situation. Pepper responded by getting an emergency hearing in her state to force Sarah back. I had to scramble, but I managed to get a lawyer and easily won the hearing, which Pepper showed up late for and told the judge it was due to a disability. The judge agreed that since there was no custody agreement and with the troubling accusations that I had gathered, it was best for now for Sarah to stay with me. I had won the first battle, but it was short-lived. Within an hour of the hearing, I started getting tons of phishing emails and texts. I was also getting password resets and MFA codes from my bank, Facebook, Reddit, and any other accounts. I knew that Steve was behind it. The very next day Jason calls. His law firm's website, email, and phone account had been hacked. Because he had to disclose the hack to the court, and because he was working on a semi-high profile case at the time the FBI got involved. To say I was enraged was an understatement. These two people had destroyed me, harmed my daughter, and tarnished the reputation of my lifelong friend. It was time for them to pay, and pay dearly. I was a man on a mission. I spent hours digging up as much dirt as I could on Steven and Pepper. I had a lot of luck with Pepper. I found social media posts of her out late drinking that correlated to tardiness and missed days at school for Sarah. I found tons of pics of her and 2 strange kids doing fun activities. I found neighbors that were willing to testify that Sarah had to come beg for food because she was left with either Drugs or the felon. I knew I could bury her. Steve, on the other hand, had all his accounts locked down. I couldn't find any dirt and it was driving me crazy. Then it hit me that I should try LinkedIn. It paid off. There wasn't much posted, but through his account I found Maria, his ex-wife's account. I reached out to her, and she happily accepted. Maria and I became fast friends. She hated Pepper, for good reason, as they had both abandoned her kids like my daughter, and didn't want her around her kids. I learned so much. To keep it short, Maria and Steve had recently divorced. As part of the custody agreement, Steve got the house, car, bank account, savings, and a lower than usual child support. Maria had traded all that money to have control of the kids. She knew he was a scumbag, and all she was concerned about was keeping her kids safe. They had a very detailed custody agreement with rules for Steve to follow. As part of that agreement, if Steve broke any rules, then he had to pay, and pay dearly. He had to sell the house and give her half of everything. His child support would also double, and Steve would be financially ruined. Steve also didn't have her blocked on social media and would regularly send texts bragging about how great his life was without her. Many of those texts had pictures of Pepper in them. We compared notes, we swapped evidence, we came up with a plan. And now it is time for revenge. First, I got with Jason. He let the FBI investigator know that I had also had some hacking attempts, and we believed it was the same person. The investigator called quickly. I gave him all the information I had and who I believed was doing it, and he asked a weird question. Do I know where Steve worked? Well, yes, I did, thanks to Maria. So apparently Steve wasn't as good a hacker as he thought himself to be. They had already traced back the hack on Jason to a business, the very same business Steve worked for. As soon as my conversation with the FBI was done, I called his work to lodge a complaint. I told the manager that someone was trying to hack me, and I was sure it was Steve. They, of course, did not take it too seriously because I had no proof. What they didn't know was they were soon going to be getting a visit from a special agent. The next week was absolute hell for Steve and Pepper. Pepper got served with the divorce papers, and her lawyer got served with all the evidence I had gathered. My lawyer said it was the most complete investigation he had ever seen. I had all 40 tardiness and 19 absences tied to nights out drinking with Steve. I had hard proof of them abandoning my daughter for days at a time. Maria even gave me a picture that was taken at 2 a.m. the night before the emergency hearing with Steve and Pepper drinking in a tattoo parlor. The same hearing, she was late and said it was due to a disability. Steve got served that he had violated the entire custody agreement. Maria had pictures from me proving he was with Pepper on nights the kids were with him, and they were left alone. She also had proof that there was contact with Pepper that violated the custody agreement. The fallout was awesome to watch. Steve was fired. Between my complaint, another older complaint of him hacking, and the FBI showing up, they had no choice but to fire him. He did avoid any legal issues as the FBI could never tie it directly to him. The word spread of why he was fired, and no one would hire him in a job again. He had to sell the house, liquidate all the investments and bank accounts, and give half to Maria. His child support got to stay the same since he no longer had a source of income. Last I heard, he was working at a grocery store. So in total his income went from $200K plus a year to less than $40K. As for Pepper, the divorce was swift and painful for her. The judge ruled in my favor for all counts. I got sole custody and sole decision making. She was forced to go to counseling, and her and drug can only visit Sarah with a third-party supervisor paid for by Pepper. Sarah is doing much better. She still needs counseling, but she thrives in school and has many friends. She very rarely sees her mom, but she is much better off without her. Not the idiot. They all got what they deserved, and I'm so glad your daughter is doing better. If they ever come at you again, I think you will have it handled. Not the idiot. You're the dad that the Sarahs in the world wish for so desperately. More than revenge. You saved her and in turn helped Maria save her kids from a life of struggling to have self-worth. I know, because I was a Sarah. Now, for the next story. Am I the idiot for not lying for my wife in front of her friends regarding me being a stay-at-home parent? When my wife and I decided to start a family, she expressed she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, so we made a plan and set everything up so that she could stay home during the early years. We had our first kid, but she didn't do too well being the stay-home and had a hard time with it. We still wanted our kids to have a parent at home with them, so we swapped out since her salary was close to mine. 2 kids later, I'm still the stay-at-home dad working reduced hours remotely. For me personally, it's easier than any job I've had in the past, even the manual labor one, but I recognize that that's just my personal experience. We've touched base on the issue a few times to make sure there's no resentment, guilt, or discomfort on either of our parts. One of her friends from her work invited us and other couples over for dinner. While there, the other couples were talking about childcare in general, and some of the women started sharing their experiences of when they were home. My wife was talking about how she had disliked it and mentioned our arrangement when one of the women said to me, "Oh, I know you're just itching to get back to having it easy." I responded that I already have it easy and that for me, being a stay-at-home dad was a cakewalk compared to my office job. I didn't see the point in agreeing with something that just isn't true for me. On the way home, my wife asked why couldn't I have just agreed with the question and played along. I asked her if she felt bad or guilty that she had a hard time with it, and she said no. So I told her to just forget about it then, because there's no reason for me to lie to make a bunch of other people feel better so long as it's fine between us. When she got home from work yesterday, she had some attitude asking me if I had another easy peasy day, and told me how all day she had to hear from her friends what a smug idiot I was for making light of their experiences by saying it was a cakewalk. I get that for a lot of people it's hard, but I don't see why I should have to lie about it or fluff someone's ego for not feeling the same way. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. You were just sharing your experience. This is one of the things I find frustrating about some social groups. I think it could be an interesting discussion to have, but more often people want to just commiserate or validate, not actually hear other experiences. You're the idiot. It's basic social skills that if someone says I had a hard time with something, you don't say how easy it was. It's crude and insensitive. You could say it's different for everyone and I'm fortunate my job is remote and leave it at that. Now, for the next story. Am I the idiot for missing the birth of my first child so a mate could be with her dying grandfather? This is a horrible situation and I need to know if my wife is justified. My wife gave birth to our first baby 3 days ago. We've had a rough few years with 2 miscarriages and a stillbirth at 37 weeks. So my wife was terrified this whole pregnancy. I am a firefighter and was on duty when my wife went into labor. Her doctor said that it would likely be a while, so I decided to stay at the base for a little longer because it is about mayhem and we're never enough people anyway. Then one of my mates gets a call that her grandfather had a heart attack and will probably not make it. Obviously she was devastated. Things got really hectic. We got called out to another fire and our captain said one of us could go but not both. I told my colleague not to worry. She should go and spend time with her grandfather since it will be her last chance. So I had to go out and miss the birth of my child. I got there 2 hours after my girl was born. I felt horrible and apologized profusely to my wife, but she just yelled at me, said I let her down in the scariest moment of her life, and then told me to leave. So I left and waited in the hallway. It's been 3 days and she refuses to say anything apart from the bare minimum related to the baby. They can leave tomorrow and she's informed me that she was going to stay with her sister who recently had a baby too until she knows what to do about our relationship or what's left of it. I understand that it must have been scary for her, but my reasoning is that only one of us could leave and I will have a whole life to be with my child, whereas my mate only had a few hours with her loved one left. Update. Many of you said how it wasn't about being there for the baby but that I should have been there for my wife. You were absolutely right. I acknowledged my mistakes and apologized to my wife. I suggested we get therapy and she agreed. We're all back home together now and have been for a while. Things are good for us and we're happy with our little family. For those of you who suspected that I cheated with my workmate, you were wrong. I may have been an arsehole in how I dealt with my wife giving birth, but I would never cheat. I love my wife very much and I'm happy she's given me another chance and intend on being the best husband and dad that my family could wish for.